You're going to want to stick around for this video. This is the story of my almost existing sports card business related to building a bridge between the sports card worlds in China and in the US. This is an interesting story to say the least, so stick around for this one. Let's get into it. To start this story, we're going back in time about a year ago. I had at that point been making videos here on YouTube for about half a year, and one day in my DMs I got a random message from somebody I knew nothing about saying, "Hey, I'd like to talk. I have this idea for a business. I'm based in China, but I'm from Canada originally, and I have this idea, and I've been watching your videos. I respect who you are and what you're doing. Let's talk." At first, I thought nothing of it. I mean, you get messages every once in a while, people who have some sort of collaboration idea. But I was like, okay, that's really cool. Let's talk with this person and see what this is all about. So the first thing is I came to learn who this person was, and I came to find out he's actually semi-well known in certain circles in the sports card world because of his history with sports cards. He's been involved with sports cards for a very long time. He's had some of the really high-end stuff that has sold on Golden through the years. That he's had interviews done on a few YouTube channels. I don't want to go into details on who he is at the moment, and you'll kind of see why as I say this story. But when I learned who he was, and then I was like, okay, so this guy seems legit. Let's have a conversation with him. So I ended up chatting with him. We did a face-to-face conversation. It was really good. He's been living in Shanghai for quite a long time now, and it has a lot of connections in the sports card world. He's an investor in some big companies, sports card companies there. He used to be partial owner of a sports card shop in Shanghai. So he had a lot of connections in the industry, and in not just the industry in China, but also the industry in the West. He had a lot of connections with some of the big head people at PSA. He just had a lot of connections. He'd been involved with the sports card world for a long time, and he was kind of outlining, what his idea was that he had originally outreached to me. And essentially it was kind of building a business that kind of had two, or let's say three main arms of it. The idea was one, kind of consignment for sellers in China to sell their cards in the US. Now, part of this was because, there are consignment companies that exist, of course, but it's not the easiest thing for the average seller in China to sell their cards on eBay themselves individually. They have to be able to, communicate in English to be able to do very well. And then the shipping costs are tough. And when buyers on eBay that are US based or other places see that, something is coming from China, they less often will bid on it. It's just a reality. People are worried about the international shipping and things like this. So, so it's a little hard to do it like that. And then if you go the route of dealing with a consignor, you also, the consignors are not really set up to be able to help with the international shipping that well. And it's not the easiest thing to be able to send to a consignor. And a lot of them also will work with something like Ship My Cards. But again, you need English. You need to be able to engage in that process. You need to be able to do your listings in English if you're going through Ship My Cards. So, so there's limitations. There's a lot of people who would still do that, but there's also limitations. So one of the things we thought is building a consignment service that was really focused on supporting the needs of people in China wanting to sell their stuff in eBay. We would help with the international shipping, and then we'd be able to help them and serve their needs, here in a way that most other companies just can't do or aren't focused on. So we thought that was one good thing. Another arm of it was going to be related to bulk grading submissions for people in China. We had some relationships through Fansmall, which I mentioned in the last video is now closed down. We had some possibilities of doing some collaborations with them with bulk submitting for CSG. We even talked with Fansmall about and they really liked this idea because at the time, and again, if you watch my last video about Fansmall disbanding, then this is going to change everything. But the idea was that, for any of the customers who submitted their bulk grades to through CSG to Fansmall, if they wanted to end up selling it in the US market from CSG, they could send it to our address in the US, and then we would consign it for them there. If they wanted to keep it themselves, and those cards would go back to China and be sent to them. But if they wanted to keep it in the US and consign it, that we would be like the stop before, so they wouldn't have to pay for the international shipping fee going back there, and then we would consign it and have a reasonable rate and all that kind of stuff. So we were even so far as to, in the Fansmall conversations, thinking that, because Fansmall was thinking about opening a branch of sorts, an office at least in the US. And then when they thought about this and saw what we were doing, they're like, oh, maybe we don't need to. Maybe we can just collaborate with these guys. The person who was going to be my business partner in this had all these connections where they trusted him and everything. So it seemed like a good collaboration and potentially really lucrative for us, and a good service for the customers that would go through Fansmall. So that was another thing, bulk grading submission. And another one is there was several different people who had money to spend on sports cards, but didn't have the access to some of the stuff that's available in the U.S. sports card shows and different things like that. Their only access was the Chinese domestic market. So the idea was that they would also be giving us some money to buy certain cards, kind of card brokering, I guess you could say. I think that's the best description I could say for that. Card broker for people, buy and sell stuff. Either some people might want specific cards, so when we go to card shows, we've been on the lookout for those specific cards. We would take a percentage based on when we found those cards, or we would hunt them down, things like that. Or if they just wanted us to be buying and selling regularly, and then at some point they take back a profit, and then we take a percentage from that over time. So these were kind of the three arms of the business that we were thinking about. And we spent a lot of time reflecting on this and analyzing what were the needs, physical space needs, what was the time related needs, how would we make the budget work, how we had some investors lined up, and we had some different ideas. We had kind of planned it out quite a lot, in fact, all the stages. I haven't talked about it on this channel previously, other than maybe some little Easter eggs about the ideas of it that I might talk about, but I never wanted to talk about it too much until it was more concrete. But this is kind of stuff that I've been doing in the background for a while, kind of trying to figure out, would this be a viable option? Could this work? And we kind of spent a lot of time working out all of the kinks and trying to figure out what it would all look like. And it looked like, when we ran our numbers and we looked at the realities and we saw the challenges that could be there and the opportunities that could be there, it seemed like a viable thing to try. And one thing about me, if I would almost say one of my hobbies, one of my interests is kind of visioning, planning. Even if it's not something I'm going to do, I like to have a vision and plan a lot of steps for how I would achieve that vision. It's just something I enjoy doing. I've done it in relation to building a farm. I've done it in relation to building all kinds of businesses that I haven't built. And I've done it in relation to stuff that we have built. I mean, we had a restaurant for a while that we ran. We ran our own English school for a while. So, some of these plans do turn into something, but other times it's just plans that I plan for the sake of planning because it's my hobby to plan. So, but this one was much more deep. And, I had made all these documents, 20-page documents outlining every little cost and, really reflecting on what are the challenges. If we face this challenge, what is the way we approach it? Who are the connections that we could be building that would be a collaborative relationship that would be useful for us, would be useful for them. I spent so much time on all of this stuff for a year, not a full-time job kind of amount of time, but I probably put in over a year. I probably put in at least 100 hours. So as we were doing this, a lot of the plans were kind of okay, we're mapping this out now, and then once I get back to the States, that's when we will start to, the investors who have committed to this, they'll go ahead and do the money part of it, and then we'll just get started and we'll hit the ground running. That was the idea with doing all of this planning before I moved to the States, so that when we got here, we could hit the ground running. So I knew, when it comes to my own reflection, I know to be careful and to be safe. So I'm doing a lot of the preparation that's just requiring my time, but it's not requiring financial resources or anything like that. It's just requiring having a good plan and being ready to implement it once the money comes in. I'm not going to pre-put money in, and I'm very glad, because you'll see why in the end, what happened with this business. So anyway, I got back here. And at first, it seemed like everything was going to be okay. I continued to communicate with this guy, my almost business partner, we'll call him. I continued to communicate to him. Everything seemed like it was okay. He said, the people he had lined up for this were still on board. The connections he had been communicating with them more, and they were more aware of what we were planning on doing, and they were finding out ways for what, how we could collaborate with them. So everything seemed like it was going really well. But then as I was here and as I was getting ready, for the first couple of weeks when I was here, I told him, I need to kind of get settled into life first, get my kids ready for school, make sure my wife's green card process and all this kind of stuff is smooth. I need a little bit of time to kind of settle in and get stuff. And he was like, yeah, that's cool. Take a few weeks and then we'll get started. And so I did that. And then when I was ready to get going, I was like, okay, let's do this. And so then the first thing that happened is that as we were ready to get going, then I don't hear from him for a week. for like 10 days. I'm like, what's going on? I come to find out he had some health issues. So at that point, even though I was kind of like a little bit like, oh, the timing of this, but then he says there's health issues and all this. I was like, okay, no problem. I have no reason to suspect any issues. No problem. I'll go ahead and keep going. So at this point, I had already like registered an LLC. I spent like $100 of my own money, $120. So I was probably going to do that anyway. And that was one of my decisions early on. Like anything I was going to do that was going to be spending my own money on this was going to be something I would have done anyway, regardless of the business. I didn't want to put my own money into it until I knew for certain that the investor money was going to be coming in and this sort of thing. So I didn't want to put any of my own into it except for stuff that I would have done anyway. So I was going to establish an LLC no matter what, because it's just a good thing to do. I think I made some videos about that in the past. If you're selling and buying on a regular basis, it's just good to have an LLC for tax related purposes and to just be a little bit safer and not have to worry, especially with eBay being a little bit more careful about taxes and things like that. It's just better to have a business, I feel. So I was going to do that anyway. So I spent some money on that and on some other things I would have spent money on anyway. But I didn't spend any other money, and I'm very glad, because that was my first worry. Like, why is, like, right when we're getting started, why is it a 10-day kind of not responding? Eventually got back. Everything still seemed okay. I was like, okay, just a health thing. No big deal. I needed a bit of time to get myself settled in. Maybe, he needed some time to settle in. And I didn't think anything of it too much, except I was just like, yeah, that was a long time to not communicate when I was trying to communicate. And he's always been a little challenging to communicate with, just time-wise. He's busy, has a lot of stuff going on, so it was always a little bit challenging to communicate with him, but it always ended up working, and when we communicated in person, it was always great. So I felt like it was not a big deal at all. So the next thing that happened, so I finished registering everything, send him messages. I got the LLC registered. I sent him some messages and was like, this stuff is ready. I think we're ready to do this. We can start doing the consignments and advertising. And he was like, yeah, I've even got my assistant, because he's also involved in, he's an investor in a few different businesses. He has an assistant that helps him with a few things. So he's like, my assistant is on board to like help us out with a lot of these things, and I don't have to pay him an extra salary because I already pay him this salary, so he can just help us with a number of these things as we're getting going. And I was like, cool, that's awesome. So everything seemed like it was gonna be pretty good. And then I was like, okay, let's get going on this. Let's have a conversation and figure out, to send the money from the investors, because he said he was ready for that, and he said he could have the first 50,000 ready to send right away. So I was like, okay, let's do that. There's a card show coming up in like next week, so if you can send me the money sooner, maybe if we need to sign a contract or something that we know what's going on with the money, that's okay. And then the card show starts to approach, and he's like, yeah, I trust that if I send you that, it'll be fine. And so I was like, okay, that's fine. If you want to sign something, that's also fine, because I know that you're putting a lot of trust in me. I'm not spending my own money. You're sending me the money. So I know that, you'd have to put a lot of trust in me. So if you want to sign a contract, and if we want to put something together, I know he had talked to some lawyers about that. And I was like, if we want to do that first and delay the money coming in, that's also fine. He's like, no, I trust you. I'll go ahead and send that first batch right away so you can start doing some stuff with it. And we talked about what we were going to do with that first batch. Part of it was going to go into buying like a larger bit of inventory so that we could, have more stuff kind of buying and selling and build up our business that way, so that when we had the consignments, we would also be able to kind of incorporate the consignments into our own buying and selling regularly and build up a larger inventory of cards for sale. So there's just, we have a quicker buildup of a reputation. So we had part of the plan was for that. Part of the plan was for the money was also going to be related to some physical space needs, some vault storage kind of stuff, to be able to have some safe places and temperature sensitive and safe and things like that, and get some insurance, for all that. So that was all going to be part of the initial funding, was going to be all related to that. And we had it all kind of worked out. And so then, the card show's coming up, and they're like, hey man, if you want me to be able to start buying some stuff at this card show that we can then sell on our store to start building up a larger inventory, if you send the money a little earlier, we can get going. And then he didn't really respond. And then a couple days passed. And then a few more days. The card show came and went, and I went to it and did some stuff just that I would do for myself, and it was fun. And then a few more days, and then a week, and then another week. And I'm sending messages every once in a while through this span, like, what happened? Like, I was kind of worried, because then a little bit, because one, I was worried because the time when he was messaging before was this health issue, and it sounded pretty serious. So I didn't know, was there some really major health issue going on with him? And that was the first thing that I was like, oh man, I hope he's okay. But then I saw on his social media, he posted something like, okay, so he's around. He's not sick. The next thing I hear is, just shortly after that, I hear that the Fansmall, a bunch of the investors from Fansmall have been arrested by the Chinese government. And I talked about in my last video what happened with Fansmall. And I didn't mention that part of it, actually, that a bunch of the high executives and the large investors in Fansmall were actually arrested, and as far as I know are still in prison right now. And the person who was going to be my partner was actually an investor in Fansmall. So once I heard that, I was like, oh no, maybe he hasn't been reaching out to me because he's in prison. That was my next, like, oh, that would make sense why he's not communicating with me. I hope he's okay. So first I go from thinking like, oh man, did he die? To like, oh man, is he in prison? But then after I have that thought, then again, a little bit later, another social media post comes up about like an art exhibit thing that he's involved with in Beijing. And so I'm like, okay, so he's not arrested either. I guess he's just not wanting to do this business anymore. And it makes sense in some ways why somebody wouldn't want to start a business like this at that moment when Fansmall was going through all the stuff they were going through. They were getting closed down. The investors, and he was an investor, were being looked at extra closely. There was issues with, maybe using a seller in the U.S. to kind of avoid tax, doing tax evasion stuff. And if we weren't careful about how we were going to do our business, people could have used us as a source of tax evasion. So I could see how with all of that stuff, maybe it really wasn't a good time to start a business like this. Maybe there was elements of this business that weren't safe for us to get involved with. I started to realize that. I'm guessing, at this point I'm only guessing, that he also had that same realization. But the problem is, it's now been like 6 weeks and he's never once responded to any of my messages, which is extremely frustrating. For me, my mindset is always like, I don't mind if the business is gonna stop. I don't mind if because of different realities we realize that we can't do this. I'm always an organic approach to things kind of person. I only do the next step once it makes sense for that step to be taken. It's always been my approach. I'm cautious in how I approach things and try to understand as much as I can before I do something. So it's natural to me that if these realities are happening, it's like, okay, I don't think it's the right time. And maybe there never will be the right time for a business like that, but it certainly isn't right now. So in my mind, that was fine. But in my mind also, I'm kind of like you have to communicate with somebody you've been building something with for a period of time. So now it's been 6 weeks, 7 weeks, and I haven't even gotten a response back from him. It's very frustrating, actually. I've been very frustrated about that. And I'm going on and looking for other jobs and I'm on the job hunt now pretty regularly. And I wasn't. For the first couple of months, I wasn't because of this, but also because, we had enough savings where we had planned originally that my wife and I, neither of us were going to start the job hunt for at least the first 2 months while we were here, just so we could settle in, spend more time with friends and family, kind of, get the kids all settled into school, all this kind of stuff. We didn't need to rush to getting a job immediately. We had enough savings to kind of hold ourselves over for a period of time. So now, I've started the process of job hunting and everything. So again, it's not a big deal. It's not like I would have been applying for jobs in those 2 months. So it's not a big deal. But the thing that's a big deal to me is just the fact that this person wouldn't come back and communicate with me and share with me about, why he stopped communicating or if he wanted to stop the business, just tell me and I'm cool with that. I'm like, oh, yeah, I understand. But the lack of communication was really frustrating. So that's why I didn't want to mention who this person was, because I didn't want to throw him under the bus completely. But I do say, like, if you are going to be doing some connection with China, send me a DM and I can, share with you, because you just might want to be careful. This person, I thought it was very trustworthy, but the lack of communication to me is it's a lack of respect for somebody that I thought I had been building an actual authentic friendship with. On the other hand, I didn't lose out on anything. I didn't spend any money. I didn't do anything beyond stuff that was just kind of initial planning, which was good, useful for me anyway. Even in the small scale stuff I'm doing for myself, it was good to know these things. It was good to see the possibilities and to analyze the different markets deeper. It's just for my own individual small scale stuff. It's useful knowledge to have. So in the end, it's really not a big deal. But it was, I guess, a learning experience and, and a confirmation that I'm glad I'm careful about how I approach things and don't go too gung-ho into things, to take small steps before doing things. Because I was approaching things that way, I'm nothing bad came of all of this except for kind of a frustration that this possible thing, it ends without any kind of communication from the other person, which is really annoying. It feels bad on my tongue to even say that, because I felt like I've been actually building a friendship with this person. So be it. Anyway, that's it for this video, and that is the story of my business that almost came to exist.